It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Mexico's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at Mexico's squad for the 2022 World Cup. Player by player section of the podcast, and we move on to a discussion of the squad. So we're going to go back to the takeaway points that we talked about at the beginning, and I think I'll just mention these because it's fairly obvious by now that Mexico has a huge pool of players to choose from, often playing two tournaments in a summer and providing enough players for those tournaments. But because of that, it's a bit difficult to determine what their A team is. And for example, this last summer in 2021, their goal team was mostly A team players, but then all their younger players and then a few selected players, they were allowed 3 overage players, played on the Olympic squad. So again, difficult to determine who among those young players would have made that Olympic squad. And we've seen time and time again going through the players that it's very hard to break into the Mexican team. And we've seen, players being, kind of eligible for USA and Mexico, or Mexico and another country, Mexico kind of winning the battle to gain their services, only for it to be too difficult for the players to break into the squad. So we talk about a couple of other notes now. One is aging starters. So many of the players in their 30s continue to start. So they certainly have the players to replace them, but perhaps those players aren't getting enough opportunity because the aging players are still starting quite a bit. So Andres Guardado is an example. He likely won't be a starter in the Cup, but he has started several games in qualifying, which is good for him, but it does limit the players who will start to less time, and perhaps prevents them from developing a relationship on the team with the other players. So to some degree, Mexico has solved this by alternating players quite a bit, especially using B team players for things like friendly and Nations League games, especially those against easier teams. However, there's still a concern that the team chemistry may be damaged by so many players kind of coming and going in this mix and match. So I kind of wonder, they usually manage okay, but I kind of wonder if they're going to have a good chemistry at the World Cup, because they haven't really narrowed it down to a select group of players. Kind of related to that point, it's difficult to determine starters. We actually thought that the World Cup qualifying games would help to clarify that, but the amount of rotation, along with some odd decisions, like we mentioned during the play-by-play podcast, starting basically 2 new central defenders in their toughest games away to USA and Canada. All of this makes it difficult to know who the starting squad is. Again, the friendlies and Nations League games at the end of this period used a lot of B team players, and so hard to know if those A team players will, are still slated as the starters after 7 games, where they only started maybe 2 or 3 games. So it seems like Mexico has a lot of work to do between now and the World Cup to narrow down their squad to 26 players for the World Cup squad. And I kind of mentioned it there. Do friendlies and Nations League games matter? Well, we saw in the Gold Cup that it didn't matter that Talavera, the goalkeeper, started all 6 of those games, because as soon as World Cup started, World Cup qualification started, Ochoa was back in the starting position. So it may be a bit deceptive. For example, if players playing in those friendlies and in the Nations League games kind of look like they're making a bid for the starting squad, but then when the squad's actually chosen, they just go back to the regular players who've been starting there for a while. So we're going to look a bit later at how many players are on the slate for Mexico and how many players will actually be able to make it. Okay, let's take a look at club affiliations. And we've actually seen a bit of a return to Mexico, or at least to the West, by some of their players who had been playing in Europe. And in truth, they don't have a lot of players playing outside of Mexico. Several of them do play in the United States, but otherwise they seem fairly happy to be playing in the strong Mexican league. So Mexico does have a good league of its own, and players may be less tempted to play in Europe, and there may be less status involved with playing in Europe than, say, for USA and Canada, where it's a bit of a status symbol. We did see Marcelo Flores, a young forward, attached to Arsenal, but he's not really in the Mexican team. We have Jesus Corona with Sevilla and Irving Lozano with Napoli. Several of them play in Spain, so generally, though, with slightly smaller clubs like Real Betis and Celta Vigo. And then I wonder if there's some arrangement between the Netherlands and Mexico, because they've always had a few players with Netherlands. Right now it's Edson Alvarez with Ajax and Eric Gutierrez with PSV Eindhoven. But we saw a lot of the players, even those who have returned back to Mexico, did play for teams in the Netherlands. Yeah, and most of the others, apart from a handful playing in America, so David Ochoa, the young goalkeeper, Julian Araujo, and Hector Herrera, one of their biggest players, all playing in America. Hector Herrera with Houston Dynamo. And but I would say more than half of the squad are playing in Mexico. So that's it for club affiliations. We're going to move on to agent experience. And I had the graphic a little bit wrong there, so I'll just fix that up. Right, so the first thing we looked at, I'm kind of working on this little stats thing I'm doing by myself, and I'm kind of looking at the total number of players under consideration, total number of players on the slate. So I'm basically looking at players who have been called up since 2020, and it's not dead accurate, but it gives a good impression. We have for Mexico 67 players who have been called up since 2020. And mostly, I think this reveals its information when we compare it to other teams. So that is the most of any team. Surprisingly, Ecuador is the next closest team. But the average is 51 players. So basically, Mexico has 16 more players to consider than other teams. And of course, we saw some of them have been off the team that might come back. So it actually might be more than 67 players. Next thing we look at is kind of candidates under consideration. So these would be players that we've labeled as definite, likely, or possible. And for Mexico, that's 43 players. And again, that's a high average. For most teams, it's the average is 32.7, so around 33 players. So this means that to reduce the squad to 26, you know, that 17 of the players that we've talked about under definite, likely, or possible would have to be cut. 17 is a lot and a difficult decision for the manager. So some teams are as low as 31 or 32. So Canada, for example, and Qatar both have pretty much decided on their teams, and the manager just has a few small decisions to make. But as I said, for Mexico, a lot of decisions still to be made in reducing the squad to 26 players. The third one is the total number of players in the definite and likely categories. And I'm finding that that indicates one of two things. So if it's a low number, and Mexico is, their number is 20 players in this category, and the average is 21. So one thing it could indicate is that it's a very stable squad. So teams like Senegal and Qatar, that basically are using the same group of players and not really introducing a lot of new players to consider. So those are the players who are going to be going to the Cup. But the other one is teams like USA and Mexico are also low in this category, but in their case, it kind of means that they haven't decided on a lot of players. So if they have a lot of players kind of on the slate, USA has 69 and Mexico has 67. They have a lot of decisions to make, and basically it looks like around 20 of them are decided upon. So they have basically 47 players or so to fill the remaining 6 positions. There are, of course, always a few surprises, late inclusions and late injuries and stuff like that. But generally, this indicates to me that Mexico is going to have quite a tough time reducing the squad to 26. Okay, let's take a look at the average age. So this is among the definite, likely, and possible players, and the average age is 26.8. That's a bit higher than average. It's usually 25 to 27, and the total average is 26.2. So they're a bit higher than that, and it stands to reason because they have a couple of players who are particularly old as far as soccer play goes. And I'm just opening it up here, or just trying to get a good view of it here. So they have their goalkeepers, particularly Alfredo Talavera is 40, and Guillermo Ochoa 37, and Rodolfo Cota 35. So right there we have them kind of raising the average. But in all, we have 11 players who are above 30 years old for Mexico. And at the other end of the scale, a lot of the young players tend to be not as likely as others, so they tend to be in the possible category at best. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players who are 22 or younger. So that doesn't really balance out the older players. So that's fine. Mexico prefers a kind of an older squad there, and those are experienced players. And it also stands to reason that, sorry, I'll just write the average age on our YouTube graphic there. It stands to reason that the number of average caps is higher than other teams, and that's very much the case with Mexico, who have 35.4 caps per player on average. So that compares to other teams where the average is 27.6, so quite a bit more experienced. And I'm seeing that only Qatar, who just plays billions of games, has more than Mexico. So a very experienced squad, which kind of fits in with the older age. And in terms of scoring, that group of players has 158 goals. So that's high, though not as high as a couple of other teams. Argentina is higher, and Qatar, again, a high scoring team. And the average number of goals works out to 3.7 per player. So that is actually also at the high end. At the high end, although Argentina is also higher. So we can say that Mexico is a fairly high scoring team. When we actually dig into the data about the players, we see that it's more spread out on Mexico than it is for most teams. So we do have kind of a big scorer in Raul Jimenez, who has 30 goals in 97 games. That works out to a 31% average. So that's very good. But nobody really even comes close to that, except Funes Mori, who has 15 goals in 31 games. So they have the right players as forwards. But we have Irving Lozano at 25% and Henry Martin at 26%. That's pretty good. But what we have with Mexico is a lot of players kind of chipping in with goals. And we certainly saw that in the World Cup qualification run, where they were getting goals from players all over the field. And so we have a lot of players who are actually above 10%. That would even include a couple of the central defenders. Central defenders, sorry. Okay, so again, those stats are not solid, but they maybe shed light on a couple of things. Now we'll just go through some of the players and issues to watch. So again, we're gonna find out that a lot of the issues center around having not decided on who the starters are, or at least those starters not being clear to us. For example, the starting keeper probably is going to be Guillermo Ochoa, but he didn't play any of the last 6 games, and he wasn't selected for the Gold Cup either. But he did play most of the World Cup qualifying games, so it's likely here. But they're also kind of bringing in a bit of youth into the team. Now, that'll probably be considered more after the World Cup, but it's not for sure that Ochoa will be the starter, because there are other candidates who are possible. I guess this is more for the overall team rather than just the defense. But do they have room for younger players, or will they deal with that after the World Cup? We do have Montes as a young central defender, 25 years old. This is maybe for example, because it's true in other parts of the field too. But we also have veterans Nestor Araujo and Hector Moreno. So will it be the veterans there, or will some of the younger players coming in, Vasquez and Jesus Angulo, have started there? Also, will they get a chance? Again, my guess is not during the World Cup, but I think they'll turn their attention to that afterwards. On the left side, it's pretty firmly Gallardo. But on the right side, it was Luis Rodriguez, but Jorge Sanchez has made a bid for right defender. So who is going to be the right defender? But it's quite possible that Jorge Sanchez will be is out with a knee injury. So it may go to Luis Rodriguez by default there. In the midfield, that same kind of young versus veterans player. We saw that Edson Alvarez missed the last several games. Will he, like Ochoa, kind of come in and resume his position in central midfield? Or will someone up and coming, Luis Romo in the central midfield, come in and take over? Actually, Edson Alvarez is not that old himself. He just feels like he's been around for a long time. But again, I kind of suspect they'll deal with the refreshing the squad after the World Cup here. And on that note, Andres Guardado, probably the most extreme example of that. The 36-year-old, kind of in and out of the squad over the last 2 years, but he has started a surprising number of games. And so, will they go with someone like him, or will they introduce someone who they've been kind of trying out for the last little while? Left midfielder is probably the least settled position on the squad. So we've actually seen like central midfielders like Herrera and Dos Santos, and I believe the forward Cardoza is that who it is? Sebastian Cordova, come back and fill that position. It doesn't seem like it's very settled, although Carlos Alberto Rodriguez seemed to be the most steady candidate as the World Cup qualifying went on, but probably the most up for grabs. That in the attack, in the 4-3-3, the midfielder will tend to play as a forward, or the winger will play as a forward. And on the left side, we have Irving Lozano or Vega. Now, I think it probably would be Irving Lozano, except he seems to be struggling a lot with injury over the last year or so. And if that's the case, Vega might actually find himself getting more starts. On the right side, not dissimilarly, it looks like Jesus Corona is out, so he probably would be the starter, Corona. However, it looks like he's injured until after the World Cup, so the position will probably fall to Antuna on the right attacking midfielder or the right forward. And then we got to wonder about the centre forward. Raul Jimenez is the man, but I kind of myself feel like he hasn't returned to the form he was in before his head injury. And who can blame him? I admire him completely for. Can you imagine having fractured your skull, the kind of fear you would have in going up for a heading challenge? And so I think that psychological element would be more difficult to overcome even than the physical element of it. And my feeling is he hasn't returned to his best form. And Funes Mori's made a good bid during the Cup, but he has struggled with injury himself. And, it may end up to Santiago Jimenez making inroads into the forward squad going forward. Maybe the World Cup will be too soon, but depending on the performance and status of Funes Mori and Jimenez, things may fall to Santiago Jimenez, the younger player. Okay, let's look at some of the new players coming in. Well, there aren't actually that many, considering, and so we're going to limit ourselves here to the players we consider likely or definite, because we have a lot of possible candidates who could fit the bill. I might mention some of the more promising possible candidates. But Carlos Acevedo looks like he might be moving in on one of the goalkeeper spots, but we have one definite and three likely there. One of them's got to get cut. And I won't go through everything we did in the player-by-player podcast. We'll just kind of mention the names. I want to mention Johan Vasquez because he seemed to be making a couple of inroads into the central defense there. And with Hector Moreno, I would still say he's a strong candidate for the squad, but he is aging out and actually playing more like a semi-retired player, just coming in for some of the starts. That may give room for Vasquez to get in. Jorge Sanchez is actually new. He's never played in a tournament. And he was really making inroads as a right defender until he got injured. And so now his injury leaves things kind of up in doubt. I'll just check. I believe that was an unknown return date for him, which is not promising. That suggests kind of a longer term injury. I think he could make a bid for starter if he's healthy. Luis Romo is a central midfielder making good inroads into the squad. This would be his first tournament if he's chosen, although he did play on the Olympic squad as an overage player. So did Jorge Sanchez, not as an overage player in Jorge Sanchez's case. So Luis Romo in the central midfield, Uriel Antuna, and the starting spot might fall to him. if Jesus Corona is out for the cup, but I shouldn't really consider him as new as all that, because he did play even in the 2019 Gold Cup. But he is, he's 26 years old. He shouldn't be on this list at all. I have made a mistake. The last one is Rogelio Funes Mores. And even though he did play in the Gold Cup and is 31 years old, he is new to the squad in 2021. And if he's fit, because again, he's struggling with injury, will definitely be at the Cup and could play a starting role. So a few names to consider there for Mexico, new names at the Cup. For injuries, we have Jesus Manuel Corona. I should say more often that his nickname is Tecatito. So you may hear him referred to by that name, but the injury list says he's out until after the Cup. Funes Mores, on the other hand, is expected to return before the Cup. Expected to return in late September. And we have Jorge Sanchez, also the other kind of main injury there on the right side. And he is kind of in the middle, out for an unknown period, and difficult to say. So we'll update those in our update podcast, and maybe we'll have a better sense of Jorge Sanchez there. Okay, finally, we look at notable absences. So Carlos Salcido played in the 2021 Gold Cup and was kind of entrenched in the team for the few tournaments before that, but then suddenly not selected after the 2021 Gold Cup. And we saw that he had been kind of unpopular amongst the fans, even during the Gold Cup. So a central defender there who is not really in the picture anymore. Jonathan Dos Santos has not appeared for any of the last 12 matches. So there is a chance that he'll come back into the midfield. He's 32 years old, but there are plenty of players around that age. And no real idea why he has kind of disappeared from the squad, but we have to think that he's not a consideration right now for the squad. But I may be dead wrong there. Miguel Layún has kind of been drifting off the squad for the last little while, but he has been considered, even was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup. But actually, the last tournament he started in was the 2018 World Cup. So not completely out of the picture or out of the question now, and he's 34 years old, but really hasn't appeared since October 2020. And I'm kind of doing this for maybe players who follow the team from World Cup to World Cup. So Rafael Marquez, one of the few players, I believe, to play in 5 World Cups. But not going to make it to his 6th. He retired after the 2018 World Cup and was even quite old at that time. So a big name, but has been off the team for a while, in truth. Same with Javier Hernandez. Those who follow closely the Mexican team will say, what are you talking about? He's been gone from the team for ages. And he kind of has. He ruled himself out of the Gold Cup in 2019 because he was expecting a baby, and hasn't appeared for the squad after that. He's only 34 years old, so it's not out of the question. But I think if he was going to come back onto the squad, he would have during World Cup qualifying. Carlos Vela, again, has kind of been off the team for a while. In fact, his last tournament was the 2018 World Cup. And, but he was talked about after that. He was talked about for the 2019 World Cup. He seems to have some friction with the Football Association or with the way Mexican players are treated, I do believe, and has kind of been arguing about that. But he had a very good season with Los Angeles FC in the build-up to the 2019 Gold Cup. So a lot of Mexican fans are hoping he would make it. Anyway, I haven't heard his name bandied about since then, so kind of off the team. Central defender Hugo Ayala last played in the 2018 World Cup, and Giovanni Dos Santos, brother of Jonathan, also last played in the 2018 World Cup. So they've been off the team for a while, so really are quite out of the picture, a lot of those players, but maybe a bit of room for especially Dos Santos, Jonathan Dos Santos, and Miguel León and Carlos Salcido could make a bit of a comeback. Okay, we're going to start with predicted starters then, and I will just copy the list from the player-by-player section of the podcast and copy it in to look at here, and then I'm going to highlight the names in green for people that we think are going to start. And then in blue, I've come to use blue for two things. These are for the YouTube watchers here. Blue is either like a definite substitute, and or it also could be kind of an indecision among two players. So players who maybe alternate in the position. So we can't fully decide on a starter, but we kind of know both of them will be there. Okay, and then the category is definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seems to be off the squad. Those are only for players we expect to make the squad. It's not a comment on whether they'll be starters or not, although naturally the ones who are definite or likely, it's more likely that they'll be starters. But there is the odd case of a player who is always selected but always comes in as a substitute, that happens. Okay, well, a definite candidate, I'm going to be bold enough to say Guillermo Ochoa will be the starter, but we do have three likely candidates in Talavera, Cota, and Acevedo. And of course, they can only bring two of those. I'm going to give a slight nod towards Acevedo. I think he's actually going to replace one of the two others. And most likely, my guess, this is just my guess, would be Alfredo Talavera, because he's 40 years old. And they need to start developing their youth a little bit there. But Talavera did play all games in the Gold Cup, so was obviously second string keeper there. So I may be dead wrong. I'm not going to say any of them as definite substitutes, because I think all of them are possible. Among central defenders, we have Nestor Araujo, Cesar Montes, who's a bit younger, and Hector Moreno, who's a bit older. And so I'm going to put all three of them in blue because I think they'll rotate. And I have them as all as likely candidates here because they all have missed a number of games. So it doesn't, none of them kind of jumps out as a starting central defender, but I do think it'll be a bit of a rotation among the three of them. And among the possible candidates, this blue, maybe I should develop a different color. But the blue for Johan Vasquez means I really think he will be a substitute at the Cup. But I think they have a bit of a difficult choice because they usually bring 5 or 6 centre backs. I think they'll have a bit of a difficult choice deciding on the last one. Could it be that they will bring Carlos Salcedo out of the cold, or one of the younger players who are available to them? For left back, I would say Jesus Gallardo is definitely the starter, one of the most firm positions on the squad. Although I do think that they will bring a backup. Half a year ago, I would have said that would be Osvaldo Rodriguez because he started in the 2021 Gold Cup, but he's drifted off the team. So now I'm not really sure, and it could be probably between Jesus Angulo and Gerardo Arteaga, but there's always room for a surprise. There's always a couple of players that are in good form just before the cup starts, that surprisingly make the squad. Perhaps we can identify those trends in our update podcast. So for right back, we have Jorge Sanchez, who I would almost color as a starter, except that he's injured and is an unknown return date. So to me, now this is a bit speculative, but to me that unknown return date suggests that it's not going to be in time for the cup. So I'm going to be bold and pick Luis Rodriguez as the starter, because if Sanchez is not available, I really do think it would be Luis Rodriguez. And for a backup position, I think Kevin Alvarez and Julio Dominguez have an equal chance. But if Sanchez is on the road to recovery, he could also come in as the backup, and they kind of hope that he gains the fitness he needs during the tournament. An outside chance of Miguel Layún coming back there, but I would put that at about 10%. Among defensive midfielders, I kind of think Edson Alvarez is gonna come back and be the starter, because Mexico kind of does that. So a bit like Ochoa resuming his starting position during the World Cup. Edson Alvarez has been very steady as the central defender. Orbelin Pineda is central midfielder. Orbelin Pineda is listed as a central midfielder, but is a pretty elusive character because he often plays in an attacking role. So he was, I've seen him, I kind of think of him more as a left attacking midfielder more than a central midfielder, but he has played in the central midfield. We consider Pineda likely to make the squad, but in terms of the central midfielder position, I would put Luis Romo ahead of him. And so I'm going to put Luis Romo as a substitute. And there's an outside chance that Luis Romo will be the starter. For left midfielder, an interesting possibility of Andre Guardado, the 36-year-old, one of the most highly capped players in the world, playing in a last World Cup for himself. But I'm a bit doubtful that'll happen. And I would think Carlos Alberto Rodriguez is more likely. But honestly, various players have come across to play the positions. So this one is really kind of up in the air for me, and I'm not willing. I mean, it could be Carlos Alberto Rodriguez as the starter. I'm not willing to kind of highlight any names here because I'm really not sure. Diego Lainez also seemed to be making inroads back into the squad. So there's a lot of possibility there. Okay, Hector Herrera, I do think he'll be a starter, probably on the right midfield. He's a central midfielder, but we kind of redesignated him as a right midfielder because that's where he's been playing. He may not necessarily play on the right midfield. He may play on the left to fill the gap over there, but I think he'll definitely be on the field. For left wingers, Mexicans really like Irving Lozano. The only danger with Irving Lozano is that he's a bit of an injury risk. So got injured in the Gold Cup and was struggling with a bit of injury since then too. I think if he's fit, he'll definitely start. And I think Alexis Vega will be brought along. So I'm going to put him as a fairly firm bid as a substitute. On the right wing, all indications are that Jesus Manuel Corona is out injured. I'll highlight that in red for the cup. So that means Uriel Antuna will be a definite, would be the definite kind of right attacking midfielder or right forward there, because there really aren't a lot of other candidates for that. Of course, it could be played by a forward, but I'm going to peg Antuna. For attacking midfielders, again, they don't use that position that much, but I'm going to peg secondary striker Henry Martin as a definite substitute. He doesn't start a lot. We think he's likely to make the squad, and he does come in quite a lot as a substitute. For forwards, I'm going to use blue for the other reason, as in I'm not sure who's going to start. No, I think they're going to start with Raul Jimenez, and I think it'll come down to whether he can rediscover the form that we know he's capable of. However, I think Funes Mori, if fit, and it looks like he will be fit, can if Jimenez isn't performing well for the first couple of games, I could see Funes Mori taking over the starting spot. But I think Funes Mori will start as a substitute. I also think Santiago Jimenez will make the squad and will come in as a substitute and hopefully prove himself, because they are a little bit short on forwards, on centre forwards here. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. So I hope you feel a bit more familiar with the players, and that piques your interest a little bit. We are the International Soccer Preview. No, we're not. This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. And so we will be doing an update on this podcast probably in early to mid-November, including some of the information that comes out. They have a few games between then and now, and we can update injuries and things like that. And that's probably going to be, as I said, early to mid-November. So keep an eye out. Us. We have a lot of podcasts now at our website at soccerphiles.captivate.fm, or you can check the show notes. Is an easy way to do it, because our show notes have been improving. So that's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.